Well, thank you everyone for joining us for Affairs Innovation Series. My name is Nurry Hong and I get to be your host, and I'm thrilled and privileged to be able to be doing this. So first off, what is the Innovation Series? This is intended to be a brief, chat between experts and myself, talking about everything that's going on with innovation and specifically food allergy, but also learning from other areas and learning how we can innovate together as a community and as a leading organization within the food allergy space, but also working with everyone. And what I hope to do in this series is really just have a discussion with the entire community, talking about science and everything that we can do to innovate and bring new solutions to the food allergy community. The intent is not to get too deep into the technical aspects and science of it all. So we'll keep this high level and relevant so everyone can really access the information and hopefully educate everybody on just different aspects of the way that we could potentially treat, cure, and diagnose food allergy. My background in terms of what I hope to bring to the table is really coming at this from the point of view as an advocate and an ally within the food allergy community, as a father of a son with food allergies, and someone who spends my entire time thinking about the science of biotech and how we can innovate in healthcare. And specifically with the company and professionally, what I'm doing now is I'm the CEO of Pareto Bio, which is a microbiome company focused on using the microbiome to re-regulate immune health. And we have a first program that's started in food allergy. So what I hope to do is really be able to talk about everything that's related to the science and innovation within our space with experts. And today I get to introduce somebody coming from the world of type 1 diabetes, specifically the organization JDRF. And I'm going to give a quick introduction to Cynthia Rice, who's our expert guest today. Cynthia Rice is the Chief Mission Strategy Officer for JDRF. In this role, she focuses on developing and advancing strategies to accelerate cures for type 1 diabetes and to help people stay healthy until that day. In addition, she provides executive leadership for JDRF's policy, advocacy, communications, and engagement functions. Since joining JDRF in 2005, she has played a leading role in renewing the special diabetes program multiple times, resulting in billions in federal dollars for type 1 diabetes research, ensuring success in JDRF's multifaceted artificial pancreas project, creating JDRF's regulatory and health policy functions, and implementing numerous high-profile public education initiatives. Previously, she held senior positions in both the government and nonprofit sectors, including policy roles in both the White House and the US Senate. Ms. Rice has a master's degree in public policy from the University of California, Berkeley, and a bachelor's degree from Harvard University. And without further ado, welcoming Cynthia. Hi, Cynthia.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. It's an honor to be on the first of this series. It's very exciting.
But we're really excited to have you and to have this discussion. And just also for the listening audience, so to let you know, Cynthia, we have a listening audience as well as a recording of this conversation that will go onto our YouTube channel for FAIR. So just letting you know that it'll be both somewhat of a mixed format. And for the listening audience, you will have an opportunity to chime in with questions towards the end. So please feel free to enter those in that chat function. So let me just set up this discussion. So why are we talking to somebody from JDRF? And Cynthia, by the way, we got to get into your background because how could you have done all those things? And I'm so curious to be able to talk to you about all the different roles you played there because you've done it all. And that's really just amazing to see. But for the audience, why are we talking to JDRF and type 1? So I think at a high level, what I'll say is that there are amazing innovations and new opportunities emerging right now in the world of type 1 diabetes. And specifically, one of the things that we wanted to talk to you about today was a very first program, a therapeutic program that's approaching the FDA for approval to be able to prevent and potentially delay the onset of type 1 diabetes. And this is an FDA drug that is going to be, if I'm not mistaken, one of, if not the first therapeutic antibody to go for an indication such as this. And obviously, there are many similarities to what we would love to accomplish in food allergy and what we think is possible with both treatment, but also prevention and early disease interception. And JDRF had an incredible role in this program. And not just in this program, but in basically every asset of innovation within type 1 diabetes. So with that set up, maybe for the audience, you can just explain, what is type 1 diabetes? Who does it affect? How is it treated? What are the unmet needs? And then maybe if you could touch on, how does JDRF, what is its mission as an organization to try to solve some of the gaps in innovation?
Absolutely. And again, really glad to be here. JDRF was founded by parents of children with type 1 diabetes to find a cure for the disease. So, we understand and work every day with, passionate parents and passionate loved ones who every day have to deal with this disease, not dissimilar from all of you who are dealing with food allergies every day. JDRF is a patient organization. We fund a significant amount of research every year. We do advocacy. We help support the community to live healthier lives until we have cures. And so we're focused on, better treatments for type 1 diabetes, help people manage the disease better, and then ultimately a cure. Now, type 1, for those of you who may not know, it's an autoimmune disease. And what that means is that the body attacks the cells in the pancreas that make insulin. And what that means is that without insulin, people cannot digest their food, and they will die within days. So people with type 1 diabetes need to take insulin multiple times a day, every day, in order to stay alive. And what's really difficult is taking the right amount of insulin at the right time. If you give yourself too much insulin, that means you drive your blood sugar too low, and that can cause emergencies, needing to go to the emergency room, seizures, coma, at its worst, death. But if you don't give yourself enough insulin, then you have high blood sugar, and that means you're damaging your micro and macrovascular systems, which causes the complications from diabetes. So it's a very difficult disease to manage. And so people need to take, measure carbohydrates, take insulin, try to take the right amount at the right time. And it's very, very challenging. So we're approaching this in a couple of ways. One is we've had exciting progress in.
Sorry, Cynthia, could I interrupt you for a second?
Sure. Yes.
That was a great job of just describing the overall condition. Maybe let's pause there for a second. And I kind of laid a lot of topics, but before we go into JDRF, which has such a tremendous job of, bringing the innovation, and then I wanted to touch on your role within that as well. How does, just for the audience's benefit, type 1, JDRF was called the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation originally. That name is no longer true, because I think, as you mentioned, this is an autoimmune condition and it can affect both kids and adults, correct?
That's right. And people can be diagnosed at any age, actually.
And historically, there was this misperception that it happened only in early young childhood. But while that is true, it also can happen at other ages, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And then the other aspect of this, that insulin, and I guess type 1 versus type 2. So people may know type 2 diabetes, which is associated with, a very significant population and, cardiovascular health, and, is a big topic in terms of a chronic condition facing us globally. Could you explain maybe the difference between type 2 diabetes versus type 1 diabetes, despite the fact they're both insulin driven?
So both type 1 and type 2 diabetes can cause the same complications. And many people with type 2 diabetes also need to take insulin, although not everyone. So there's a lot of similarities between the two diseases. Really, the differences is sort of in terms of how they originate. And in type 1 diabetes, it's an autoimmune reaction that damages the insulin producing cells. And in type 2 diabetes, it's a metabolic disease that begins a different way. But ultimately, there are a lot of ways in which the two diseases, a lot of the work we do can benefit people with type 2 diabetes. There's a lot of collaboration across the two diseases. And then we also have collaboration between type 1 diabetes and other autoimmune diseases, because many people with autoimmune diseases actually have more than one disease, and there's some similarities in the science.
Okay, thank you for that. And I think one other additional clarification is that in type 1 diabetes, and this is true for some type 2 diabetics as well, but not all treatment for type 2, the insulin requirements, insulin is the only treatment, and it really is treatment quote unquote replacement therapy, essentially, for the missing insulin in type 1 diabetes patients. And for people who don't understand what that means a type 1 patient is pricking themselves with a pin multiple times a day, typically, to take their blood measurements, and then also being very precise in how much carbohydrate and sugars they can eat based on the insulin dose that they give themselves. And this isn't done just with every meal. This is done with every single moment of the day and every snack that comes in between, and nighttime balances that also have to be regulated.
Yeah, we like to say it's a 365 day a year, 24-hour a day disease, because people do have to manage it, and around the clock. Now, some of the newer technologies have really helped improve the ability to do that, but it's still very challenging, even with the best technologies.
Okay, and I mentioned that because there have been other studies published in the food allergy space historically, where they looked at the psychosocial impact of these conditions on the patients. And food allergies surprisingly came out very close to type 1 diabetes in terms of the daily impact. And the difference is that in food allergies, it's often hidden because there are no, external, devices or medications typically, other than your epinephrine device. Whereas with type 1, it's obviously much more, in front and obvious to everybody, given the necessary treatments and devices involved in management. But I thought that was a very interesting finding, and another link between the two diseases. Okay, so now let's talk about JDRF. So this landscape of type 1, tell us a little bit about how JDRF was approaching that and all the different roles that you got to play and really helping push some amazing, I would say, clearly, industry leading or, just thought leading initiatives in terms of, your role. So maybe educate our audience a little bit in terms of the power that JDRF has been able to, bring to the table in terms of the patient community.
Well, we act in a number of ways. At our core, we raise money and we fund research directly. But research alone is not going to get us a cure. What we do is we fund academic scientists to help discover new pathways to help cure this disease. But we also move things into the translational space, and we collaborate with other funders and with companies to help translate discoveries into potential therapies. We work closely with other nonprofit funders and with the National Institutes of Health to have an overall research strategy for a given therapy area. And then we work with the regulatory officials and health policy leaders to help make sure that that research can move forward, but also that alternate therapies can be approved and people will be able to have access to them. So we call this our pipeline strategy, that we're, for a given therapy area, whether it's devices like the artificial pancreas or cell-based therapies or immune therapies, we want to make sure that there's multiple options moving from the early discovery phase through translational research, regulatory approval, and healthcare access. And we do that by collaborating with a lot of other organizations in the public and the private sector, and encouraging them to join with us to move things forward.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. And we're going to talk about some of those collaborations and how that's led to successes. I think for the audience, just to be very transparent, you and I know each other from working on various projects in the past through our, professional lives. And I've had a chance to see JDRF and you specifically in action, really pushing the funding opportunities for these types of initiatives. And I wanted to talk about one of those because one of the things that we had touched on when we worked on some initiatives together was this notion of funding a gap within the larger research space related to fundamental understanding of the mechanisms underlying this disease, and better being able to, whether it was the intent or a clear outcome, one of the outcomes from that research was basically redefining this entire disease category and how you can diagnose it. And could you maybe speak to that a little bit, because that innovation and how that's going to lead to this therapy that we're going to speak about, I mean, with such a fundamental scientific need that was missing, and you fill this major gap. So maybe talk to the audience a little bit how you were able to do that.
Absolutely. And, JDRF has worked very closely with the National Institutes of Health really since our founding. And we, encourage Congress to fund diabetes research at NIH, and our scientists work closely with the scientists at NIH. And what I'm about to talk about really involved JDRF and researchers at NIH and other institutions. One of the things that NIH has funded with JDRF's encouragement is a natural history study of type 1 diabetes, which followed thousands of people over time who had been diagnosed with type 1 and their immediate family members. And as part of that data collection, which happened over many years, we learned that there are markers of the disease that appear in the blood, before someone even needs insulin, and that over time, these markers, these antibodies, once someone has two of them, that they are 95% likely over a certain period of time to ultimately need insulin and have full-blown type 1 diabetes. And so as a result of this this data collection that happened over time, we convened experts from academia and the government and the nonprofit sector to kind of review this data, and developed a staging of type 1 diabetes, really a new paradigm for saying that once you have those two autoantibodies, you have type 1 diabetes, that is really the diagnosis of it. And putting in place stages, which is something that cancer has had for some period of time, and some other diseases as well. So the idea of staging is not a new idea, but in our case, it has really enabled us to identify people who are really have already developed the disease, and to identify them for potential therapies to help halt the disease and potentially reverse it.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing that the research was able to produce that. And just to, I'm not sure how much you follow the world of food allergy research, but food allergy research has, we used to always say that it was 15, 20 years behind asthma, not let alone other indication areas like oncology. When I think about the world of food allergy research, I often thought about type 1 diabetes and how there were gaps in just fundamental understanding that needed to be filled, and then how that was leading to innovation that was really going to be meaningful. The parallels are really uncanny in terms of the need in food allergy for better diagnosis. We have very poor diagnostic measures, and obviously that has an impact both on just understanding who has the disease, but also makes clinical trials more difficult. I believe, similar to JDRF, there was a need really to develop world-class clinical researchers to be able to do the research that you're describing. And through the NIH and other programs, you were able to do that. And in our case, in food allergy, FAIR has taken leadership to really try to, again, work with the NIH and other organizations to bring a network to do similar type of large-scale clinical research, which is now emerging because food allergy has started to take leadership in prevention research, given the ability to intervene early in these atopic conditions. So it really is amazing that what we can learn from what has been done and what works, and then taking all of the lessons learned and bringing that forward is, I think it's a really exciting time, because I also believe that the NIH and other clinical networks have seen this success and are trying to apply it in other immune conditions that are chronic immune conditions specifically.
No, it is a really exciting time, absolutely.
So let's talk about this new prevention. So I'm just going to give everybody an overview, then you tell me how this thing even got to be. Okay, so this is a monoclonal antibody drug. So for food allergy folks, this is like the same kind of class of therapy as Xolair or dupilumab that we talk about in the food allergy space. So it works in a different way in the case of this drug, which is called teplizumab. So teplizumab works by blocking CD3. It's an anti-CD therapy, and that is on T cells. So even though that, as Cynthia described, this is an insulin-driven disease, there is a mechanism that you can target on T cells, which in food allergy we talk about all the time, to potentially delay and treat type 1 diabetes. And this is a completely new way of thinking about it, because up until this point, people weren't using antibodies or small molecule drugs to try to treat insulin-based diabetes. It was all insulin. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Okay. Okay, so now coming up this year, we have this drug developed by a biotech company called Prevention Bio, who is going to seek breakthrough status with the FDA for an indication to delay or prevent type 1 diabetes in at-risk individuals. This has priority review. There's an advisory board meeting now set for May. The PDUFA, when the FDA reviews this filing sometime in the summer, is the expectation. And there are additional indications that the company will pursue with this. But the data package that was used is what I think is interesting. So the initial discovery, I'd love for you to talk about that, but this showed that after a 2-week course of therapy, those patients who received teplizumab had a median of 3 years delay in onset of their type 1 diabetes versus the placebo group. And that was really an extended understanding of the potential, which is where I'll turn it over to you. So where did this even come from?
Yes, I mean, this is a long but great story of collaboration that has led us to this point. And it is truly exciting. This is the first time that we have had, a therapy that has, appears to be delaying type 1 diabetes. And just to give you an example, I remember talking to a mom at one point who had, a husband with type 1 diabetes and a teenager with type 1 diabetes and another one who already had the antibodies, didn't need insulin yet. And she said, I want a cure, but if I could delay my teenager getting type 1 diabetes for another 3 or 4 years and they could get through middle school and high school, it would mean so much to be able to do that. And our goal is, of course, we can start with prevention of 2 to 3 years, and that we can make those numbers grow over time through better and better therapies. But this is a drug that, JDRF's academic funding, decades ago in California helped discover and help fund the early clinical trials on. And then after that, the National Institutes of Health funded research utilizing it. And ultimately, the recent studies, the NIH funded some of those, and then the private sector came in to commercialize it. And we helped fund some of that translational work, and it's now, as you said, the application is in to the FDA, and it's potentially the first disease modifying prevention therapy for type 1 diabetes. So we're excited about that. And, and our goal is to have multiple prevention therapies available, and prevention therapies that will prevent the disease for longer and longer. And ultimately, some of these same therapies could really be curative, even for someone who ultimately needs insulin potentially, in the future. So it's exciting.
It's incredible. And well, first off, I would say, I don't know if congratulations is the right word here to use, but to the community of type 1, that these kind of innovations are on their way, that the hope and commitment that your organization has been really dedicated to is seeing the fruits of that labor. And I want to, just first commend you for that. Also, this isn't the only one. I mean, we're going to talk about this because there's such clear parallels to what we, because it's so innovative and the different hands the JDRF had in it. But it's also, you are, as an organization, have been involved in basically every similar type of innovation, including things to make just daily care better for this population. So there are similar parallels across multiple categories of patient care that I think that we as a community and food allergy nonprofit could also learn from. So, for the audience, I mean, that means that starting with what you said earlier, identifying the diagnostic or the markers for even how to detect if you're at risk and how to measure if you're now diabetic or have type 1 diabetes, then doing the initial studies to investigate whether a novel therapy approach could potentially treat, working with the FDA or NIH and FDA and all the government organizations to make sure that there was a path towards this potential approval. And of course, working with the commercial players to bring it to life in terms of access to patients as it potentially gets approved.
And we recently just added one more thing to that that I didn't mention earlier, which is that we're now starting to educate clinicians about the staging of type 1 diabetes. And also we have what we call a T1 Detect program, so that people can go to our website and find out how they can get a kit to test their blood to see if they have these autoantibodies. Because these early prevention therapies, in order to really benefit from them, you need to take them when early on in the course of your disease. So it's important for people to know whether or not they have the antibodies or not. So we are have a new initiative around that too. So that's pretty exciting.
So just changing the standard of care and also educating everybody about it at the same time. It's fantastic. Okay, so can you comment just for a brief second, how has the healthcare community or the payer community thought about this drug and now the way to think about type 1 diabetes as a category? Is there a lot of excitement for these type of prevention solutions that are science driven? Because that is a question and an opportunity that we are very excited about in food allergy.
Yeah, we work pretty closely with payers across the country, in part to sort of underscore the unmet need in type 1 diabetes, that, insulin's not a cure and people have a large burden of the disease and costs of the disease. And so, when new therapies, whether they're technologies or a potential drug, are coming forward, we definitely share with payers the important information about the unmet need and how this could help address them. Our goal is to, again, have multiple therapies covered. We talk about coverage, affordability, and choice. We want health plans to cover new therapies. We want them to cover all the therapies that are available, and we wanted them to do so in an affordable way. So, if we could prevent this disease, I think not only would the people with type 1 diabetes benefit, but it could be save dollars, in the healthcare system as well.
I could talk about that topic just endlessly with you around how that might be changing and what you could do as an organization, leveraging all those other aspects that you bring to the table as an organization. But we'll save that for another talk, maybe as a follow-up to innovation, but also healthcare, healthcare innovation in our country as well. I'm gonna bring us back to a little bit of the top here. So in our frantic start to this conversation, I didn't have a chance to really get a little bit of your background and why, you've worn basically every hat within this organization and have been behind the scenes and have been in front of the scenes now, just really leading the charge. I'm really curious just to kind of maybe take it back in the context of understanding your history and what gets you motivated for, fighting this fight and how you got here. I'd love for, you to share a little bit of that and then translate that to a little of the, some of the lessons learned for us as a community as we're trying to emulate the successes that you've been able to achieve.
Well, I appreciate the question. And, it's been a wonderful experience working at JDRF. I had started my career in public policy, working for nonprofit organizations, and then working in the U.S. Senate and in the Clinton White House. And then, finding my way to JDRF. And so I've worked on healthcare in a number of different contexts. And I think that, when I was a congressional staffer, advocates whose family members were affected by various diseases would come and meet with me and talk about their needs. And I was working on Medicare and Medicaid and health insurance coverage and a whole range of issues. And so when I left government, I was really interested in working with a patient organization, and was thrilled to find my way to JDRF. And one of the things that I really value about my time at JDRF is that we every day I learn something new about the science, right? I'm not a scientist, and we have such exciting work that's happening in science. But I also am working with families from all across the country and all across the world who are mobilizing to make a difference for their loved ones and for others affected by the disease. And, I think of the lessons learned here is that, JDRF was an organization founded by, two families. And even today, a small group of families can influence a given member of Congress or can influence a health plan by talking about your unmet needs and how those officials can help. And so, that's one of the lessons is I've really sort of seen how really the impact that families can have on public policy, in both in Congress, but also in the healthcare sector and also in the research world. So that's been really satisfying, and been glad to do my part to sort of help organize that. The other thing which I touched on earlier is really partnerships. I think every organization needs to have its goals and strategy, and its strategy should include the things that it can do, but also the things that they need other people to do, because none of us are going to discover and develop a drug on our own, right? And find a cure. We need our fellow nonprofit organizations and the private sector and the government and others in the healthcare system to take action. So all of those partnerships, I think, are critical, and in fact are really becoming more critical every day. So those are, I think, two of the big lessons that I've learned at JDRF.
The partnership aspect. Well, so first off, thank you for that. And I know what you have done for this community, and just I really wish everybody could understand what kind of influence you've had. And I would also say thank you to you for what we're going to benefit from in terms of what is possible. And I'm serious that that's part of what gets me excited about what's going on in food allergy research, because you see what's happening in type 1 and other areas like that, which makes it really, it makes it real. With regards to the both the people and the collaborations, maybe just touch on the need to play this middle role, coordinating so many different moving parts. That must sometimes lead to conflicts. I guess that's something as just organization. I think we all want to just be able to bring everyone together, and I think you, as a nonprofit, I think has clearly demonstrated how to do that. And so I think it demonstrates what's possible when you can bring everyone and just paddle in the same direction. So that's, again, I think an incredible, inspiring message to end with. I'm going to open it up here for any discussion or Q&A from the group. So from the live audience, if there are folks watching and have any questions for Cynthia about her experience at JDRF or the type 1 world, now is the time to do it. And as we're waiting for that, maybe touch on some of the other innovations that are going on, because I think those are really exciting as well. We just talked about one therapy, but what else is going on in terms of cool innovations within type 1?
Well, we've had an enormous sea change in the last decade that's been driven by JDRF and our partners in developing what are now multiple artificial pancreas systems that are available to people with type 1 diabetes. And these are devices that help automate insulin delivery. They measure glucose, they give you trends, and they use those glucose trends to give people the right amount of insulin at the right time. Now, they're not fully automated, but they help people, they enable people to get much better control of their glucose than they can without it, and with less burden. So, and this was a long, story of our scientists seeing early data that made them excited that this was possible. JDRF funding academic research to test it, us working with regulators and payers on pathways, and ultimately multiple companies taking up the mantle and moving commercial systems through the pipeline, so that now we have 2 systems approved, and there are more in the pipeline that are making a real difference for people with type 1. So that's really been, a life change for so many people, really in the last decade.
I know that type 1 has, because of all the resources that you've been able to create as, true platforms for research, other disease areas have taken advantage. And a question that came up from the audience was, how do you think about working in collaboration with other disease areas as well? So maybe touch on that a little bit in terms of what, whether it's other disease areas reaching out to JDRF or vice versa, and what may, be in hand for the future.
Absolutely. No, we do work with a lot of other diseases on some projects that are very specific and some projects that are very broad. I mean, we work with a range of other patient organizations on healthcare access issues, for example. But on the research side, there are other autoimmune diseases where we're co-funding and collaborating on research that would affect multiple diseases. In terms of diabetes complications, we work with groups that are focused on eye disease and kidney disease and type 2 diabetes. So there's a number of sort of joint projects that we work on together.
That's great. And what else is coming in terms of something we didn't touch on was the direct funding that you provide in innovation. So maybe just touch on that and how that's even evolved as another leg under the stool, so to speak.
Absolutely. At our core, we fund a significant amount of research. It varies the number by year, but we fund in cell biology, the underlying mechanisms of the disease, as well as promising academic research in a range of, in the US and actually across the globe. We really fund the best research wherever it can be found. And we have a dedicated staff of scientists on staff who kind of run our competitions for grant funding, and outside investigators that give us their reviews and help advise us on what to move forward with. So we're proud of that work.
And I know you'd spend a lot of time thinking about the scientific strategy for type 1, and then where JDRF can play a role with that. And I know that's updated annually, and I believe you have separate review, or I don't know what the governance at this point, but I know the organization takes that strategy very seriously. Is it the same group of people that prioritize the focus year to year and mid long-term plans for the organization, or how does that work?
Yeah, so we do have a process where we update our strategy annually and make it available on our website, and part of that process involves an outside advisory panel of scientists. And then we have a research committee, which is made up of people affected by type 1 diabetes themselves or their families, providing that patient prioritization as well. So it's really a combination of scientific staff with outside scientific experts, and a governance process overseen by people affected by type 1 diabetes.
That's great. And a question that came up from the audience was related to international collaboration. How does JDRF collaborate internationally, and do you see unique opportunities or challenges there? And would love to have you speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting. And there are a number of governments around the world, whether it's the EU, the Canadian government, the Australian government, in the UK, and other places where there's research funding that we are collaborating on and encouraging and sharing. Our scientists are sharing information, and where the federal governments of those countries have invested significant amounts in type 1 diabetes as well. So we do have a very international approach. We also fund academic investigators, around the globe as well. That's great.
That's great. Anything else that you want to leave us with as we, get to ponder how we take some of these wonderful lessons and apply them to food allergy innovation? I think we're wrapping up here on time. I really appreciate you joining and doing this and sharing all of those insights. I'm very excited to continue to watch what happens in the world of type 1 and try to learn from that as best as we can within food allergy. But anything specifically, one last question maybe. Can you point to one specific investment that JDRF has made? Well, I think we covered this. One additional investment that was transformative for the space that we should be on the lookout for?
Well, I did talk about the artificial pancreas initiative, which I think was a significant investment for JDRF that's had a big impact in the last decade. But I think moving forward, we've talked about immune therapies and prevention therapies, and those will make an enormous difference. But the area that I haven't talked about that has enormous potential, and there are numerous possible ways of moving forward, is what we call, it's a form of beta cell replacement. I mean, it's a cell therapy that would be protected by a device and would basically replace the missing insulin that someone with type 1 diabetes has. And there are multiple approaches that JDRF and others have helped fund that are now that companies are moving forward with, with different types of cells and different types of devices to protect those cells. And that could be enormously impactful if you could go to your doctor's office and have a package of cells essentially inserted under your skin, and you could go forth for 2 or more years without having to take insulin, and having those cells provide the insulin to you. That would be an enormous step forward. So there's a lot of exciting work going on there as well.
Once again, just leading all innovation areas, because that is something that people have talked about trying to do in a lot of areas. And again, type 1 diabetes is absolutely one of the leaders in trying to apply cells in that manner. It's incredible. That's regenerative organ therapy, essentially, trying to not just replace the insulin, but the source of the insulin. That's again, it's truly inspiring in terms of what you as an organization can accomplish, and also the models used. So really, thank you, Cynthia, for participating.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm really glad that we got to at least catch up in this format, and hope to just continue to follow the news in type 1 and see all the successes that you've had.
No, thank you. Really appreciate being here, and excited to hear about some of the things that are going on in food allergies, and glad you guys are moving things forward, because it's a really important area to many people too. So thank you for all you're doing.
Well, thank you. And maybe, FAIR and JDRF can work together in the future one day, solving some new problems in immune health and global immune health in kids. So thank you to the audience for paying attention and listening. And thank you to our wonderful guest, Cynthia Rice from JDRF today. And with that, we'll sign off.
Thank you.